voice, I know. If you're out there, time to come in. I know the food and the drinks are so appetizing, but you have no idea how appetizing the Ignite Talks truly are. They're going to be incredible. I'm looking at the eyes of these wondrous people that will be speaking, and they are going to be igniting digital media learning. When I say ig, you say night. Ig. Night. Ig. Night. When I say ig, you say night. Say it louder this time. Because ig. Night. Ig. Night. When I say ig, you say night. Ig. Night. Ig. Night. All right. When I say are you ready, you say we are ready. Are you ready? We are ready. That sounded good for someone who's dying, but let's do it a little. Are you ready? We are ready. Say it like drunker, okay? Like you really want more drinks. Are you ready? We are ready. Okay, so the people that are speaking up here need your energy. Your energy gives them energy, gives us energy. My name is Andrew Slack, just to give you a little background. I'm the MC of the Ignite Talk. It's an honor to be here at Digital Media Learning. Woo! All right, good. My background is starting the Harry Potter Alliance. The Harry Potter Alliance uses parallels from Harry Potter to inspire a network of over 1 million Harry Potter fans to become heroes in our world. We've done a lot of awesome things like sending planes to Haiti and building libraries across the world and getting Warner Brothers to make all Harry Potter chocolate fair trade and UTZ certified and a lot more. Now, all of those one-off victories are building an argument that fantasy is not an escape from our world, but an invitation to go deeper into it. You know what? I'm feeling like you guys wanted to applaud even more there. And I want you to warm up. I want you to feel like no inhibitions. So when I say ig, you say night. Ig! Night. Ig! Night. That fantasy, it's like my big line. It's like my one-trick pony. So just like treat it like I have a dream. Like, woo, yeah! That fantasy is not an escape from our world, but it's an invitation to go deeper into it. All right! When I say woo, just go crazy. Woo! Yeah! We're going to get fired up and ready to go. We're going to hear from incredible speakers who realize that in a world where our young people are putting out media narratives and changing the cultural narratives and running the internet, the children are not our future. I believe the children are our present. And as a producer of PBS once said to me, I do not make television for children, I make television for short people. Here at DML, we believe that we need to leave no childhood behind. We believe in revolutionizing education and revolutionizing the civic imagination. Tonight you'll be hearing from people who are reminding us that in a world where we have the interconnectivity of the internet, we are the media. And in a world where Black lives truly matter, when we unleash our civic imagination, each of us can indeed breathe. J.K. Rowling said, we do not need magic to transform our world. We carry all the power we need inside of us already. We have the power to imagine better. Tonight, we are going to see and hear from some of the coolest visionaries out there. This is time to let loose. It's time to have fun. It's time to get a drink if you want one. Or just let the endorphins flow from the adrenaline and the passion and the vision from these incredible speakers that you'll be seeing, talking about revolutionizing learning and libraries and all of that. So are you ready? Yes! It was really, we are ready. You kind of forgot your lines. It's cool. Are you ready? We are ready. Are you ready? We are ready. When I say ig, you say night. Ig. Night. Ig. Night. And after this, we're going to go drink. It's going to be fun. It's going to be awesome. And we're going to be, this is like fast. It's challenging. It's 5 minutes. each of these people gets 5 minutes, and then they're shoved off. It's like Hunger Games style. There's somebody with an arrow over there, so like they're going to be moving fast. This thing pops. Those slides are not going to stop. So just be in touch with them. I'm going to say one more time, are you ready? You're going to say, we are ready, and I'm going to hit this thing. And when I hit this thing doesn't stop. It's crazy. Like, this is like a crazy thing. And we're just going to imagine better learning. So, here we go. I'm getting nervous. Like, I'm excited. What's going to happen? Pop, pop, pop! Okay. Are you ready?
We are ready!
Let's go!
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sophia Bender, a graduate researcher from the Indiana University Creativity Labs. But that's just my secret identity. Even though I never really liked school growing up because I thought it was boring, I'm actually a gigantic nerd. I'm a nerd for stories, including this one. But throughout my schooling, nobody ever seemed to value the kinds of interests and literacies I was developing as a fan of these stories. I can't possibly be the only one for whom this has happened. With pressure from high-stakes testing, school must be more boring than ever these days. With even less opportunity to learn from the interests and media literacies that kids are intrinsically interested in pursuing in the first place. Well, let me tell you what happened when I pursued one of my interests for the first time, cosplay. And as a budding learning scientist, I was looking out for all of the disciplinary content I had to use in order to complete these costumes. Cosplay is a portmanteau of the words costume and play, and it means portraying a character from a media property and often creating the costume in order to do so. And I'd always admired them, but never really gotten the chance to dive into it myself until recently. I was doing a deep dive into sewing and its connections with math for a research project. And actually, one of these costumes was a project for an art class I took. But there's a lot more to cosplay than just that. Most cosplayers don't have that kind of external motivation, and yet, look at some of the elaborate things they come up with. I could never hope to make anything like that. There's got to be so much great learning happening here. So I was open to recording whatever learning I came across. My first cosplay was Sailor Moon, the transforming champion of justice and defender against evil. So I 3D printed this brooch and sewed circuits into it to make it light up. And I also made this collar and had some help with sewing the skirt. My second was Itachi, my favorite character from the anime and manga Naruto. So I sewed him this cloak, and there's a secret on the inside. More lights I sewed in. And the third cosplay was a lesser-known character from Naruto. This is called a closet cosplay, meaning I just assembled it from clothes I already had, very little additional sewing. A lot of cosplayers start out this way. It allows anyone to participate without needing access to special tools. So, what I learned about learning from this. First of all, it is fundamentally social. Without help from more experienced sewers, I never could have made such advanced projects. The internet provided tutorials, and friends and fan conventions provided the context in which to wear the costumes. For science, I had to use an understanding of circuitry to sew circuits into two of my costumes. You can see. So that also is the technology that I used. But as for other technologies, I had to have an understanding of the internet in order to find the tutorials online. I also got to use some cool high-tech tools like 3D modeling software, 3D printers, and laser cutters. Now, sewing also involves a ton of math, such as measuring, symmetry, using in patterns, and most complex of all for me is envisioning what two-dimensional fabric will look like in 3D form on an actual person. Of course, I learned a lot about the craft of sewing and about aesthetic composition and things like that, but I barely even began to touch on some of the other artistic techniques that cosplayers use, like painting or sculpture to make props and armor or embroidery. There's so much. These two cosplayers at the anime convention at the Naruto fan meetup, they reenacted the scene and the entire crowd went, "Oh." because we were all literate in the narrative of these characters. But just because we're literate in the narrative doesn't mean we have to accept it exactly as given to us. Cosplay also allows fans to question norms around gender, body type, ethnicity, etc., and to question the way the narrative played out, such as by giving more agency to Disney princesses by turning them into Sailor Scouts. And of course, the fan conventions provide the context that make it acceptable for people to walk around in the costumes of cartoon characters for a few days. Without that meaningful context, I don't think people would be so motivated to do something that's difficult. And it really is hard stuff. And yet I was super motivated to do it anyway. And it made me feel proud and kind of giddy. I was able to pursue my interests, have fun with my friends, and practice my skills with valued disciplinary content. Imagine if we allowed kids to pursue their interests in schools in a way that was meaningful to them and their friends, and they would be able to develop their talents and passions. Yes, it would be rich. Thank you, everyone.
Sophia. So I'm Tim Carpenter from Engage, and I wanted to let you know, in case you hadn't noticed, that Americans suck at aging. We are absolutely awful at getting older, and so our dream at Engage is to create places where aging can happen in a much cooler way. So we created these places where arts and lifelong learning take the place of getting older. People who live together who are old have conversations like, how many medications are you on and how much does your elbow hurt? And we created these places called senior arts colonies where people move in and the glue that holds the community together is arts and lifelong learning. So you walk downstairs and you exchange script notes, you go to classes, you learn about art, create new things. And when the first one started to open, there was an article in the paper, and a woman named Suzanne Canody called me on the phone and said, I'm not an artist, I'm not a musician, I'm not a dancer, I'm not any of these things, but I'm thinking I might want to move in. So I said, well, if you're not any of these things, why do you want to move in? She said, I have a story to tell, I might be a writer. So I encouraged her to just go ahead and move into the Senior Arts Colony in Burbank and see what happens. And her first order of business was going to a writing class, of course, downstairs. And the assignment was to write something about conflict. And she turned in a 12-page screenplay. And for those of you who are writers in the audience, starting with film writing as a writer is just outright stupid. But what I really wanted was for the script not to suck, because I liked Suzanne a lot and I wanted her to win. I wanted her to change the way people think about this thing. And so I started reading it, and it was this thing called Bandita. And it was a story of this older woman in Burbank who rode a senior bus to a liquor store and is lowered down on her walker with tennis balls on the front of it, and she saunters into the place and puts on a mask from the film Scream, pulls a gun, and starts to rob the place. And during the course of the robbery, makes friends with the older Armenian gentleman behind the counter to the point where she gets away with the crime in the end because he likes her so much. And she's sitting with her access card with the mask and the bag of money at the end of the movie waiting to get away with her access bus card. And so we decided we're going to make this movie. So I became a film producer. Another thing, do not become a film producer. So we had casting calls in our buildings. We cast all these people who had no idea what they were doing. We hired some guy who had never directed a feature before. I think he had made a documentary about Tibet. So it was just this crack squad of geriatrics who had no idea what they were doing. And her film won into competition at the Valley Film Festival, and the first time she saw her little 12-minute film was on stage weeping while she won the audience award at the Valley Film Festival. And I do a radio show called Experience Talk, so I'm kind of sort of in the radio business, and we called up Ira Glass from This American Life and said, we've got this little film that could story about this little old woman who'd never done anything for herself and never written a word and wrote this film. So she made it onto the television show, This American Life. It was the first episode that Ira had filmed for This American Life. And so now she's stopped at Trader Joe's up the street all the time, and people ask, I got to know, did Bandita make it into the Sundance Film Festival? And the reason I tell Suzanne's story is because I want to be Suzanne when I grow up. I'm kind of actually envious of the end of her story and what that's like. And I can't wait to get older. So our concept at Engage is to create a place where that kind of stuff happens every day. You go downstairs, you take a risk, it doesn't matter what age you are. If you knock it out of the park, your life changes. And we see it happen every day in our world, and people like Suzanne doing things like this and changing their community and the surrounding community where these places are. So that is our story. I think I might have ended early, so.
That is not my title. And if this was PowerPoint karaoke, then I might have a place to go. But that is what I'm going to be talking about. So I'm going to be talking about drones today. This is a project I've been working on with my colleague Nathan Matias. And I want to ask, can drones be made civic? Can they be a civic technology? Can they have certain values that we think about? Now, when we usually think about drones, we think about things like the Predator drone. We think about warfare. We think about drone strikes. And this is not necessarily how drones are being used. You know that they're becoming smaller. They're more civilian uses for drones. And they're being used more and more in the civil sector for journalism, mapping, monitoring of human rights, development issues, humanitarian issues. And these are really great, but there's still some problematic aspects of drones. You can't have a conversation with a drone like you would in other kind of civic engagement spaces. They're a form of surveillance in the very literal sense of, surveilling over you. And so how can we think about them through the perspective of participatory civics, kind of making media to make change as a way to make drones civic? And so a good reference for this is the work of Public Lab and what they've been doing with grassroots mapping. So this is some imagery from the deep water oil spill off the Gulf of Mexico, and they worked with community groups there in order to map those areas that were affected and really understand, like how we can take this technology and solve a real problem, build a community around it, and have a sense of ownership over that. And so that participatory civics aspect comes through a participatory design process. I'm going to offer 4 steps by which I think we can make drones more civic by thinking about participatory design for them. And so one goes back to this ownership idea in terms of making sure that the people, the community, the conservationists, the community members that are caring about a particular problem are involved in a decision making around what goals are set, how's it going to be used, what data is going to be collected, how is it being used to use a set of shared values that community may adopt. So once again, the Public Lab did this when they worked with the community members in New Orleans who wanted to do that Gulf mapping. They're setting the goals here. They're the ones that are actually doing the mapping themselves. Another group out of Georgia Tech with Carl DeSalvo was working with foragers in Atlanta to see if drones could extend their work in their communities to grab the fruit off the trees that would otherwise not be used in the city. And so that's some ways that we could do it. The second way that we can use participatory design is through actually doing knowledge transfer. So these would be the people are creating the drones themselves. They're learning how to build them, repair them. They understand that technology in a way that allows them to have a sense of ownership over it in that dimension. So Public Lab, once again, when they're doing the grassroots mapping, they now have a kit that people can use that can use some local materials to customize it for their particular context. And they can repair it themselves using very simple materials. A group called Digital Democracy has been working in Guyana with the Wapachana people who are trying to monitor their lands with aerial surveillance. And they're actually building the drones here. They're soldering the electronics together and making sure that they can repair them and use them themselves. Number 3 for participatory design practice for drones is around the data analysis, the interpretation of all of this photography and other data that they're collecting. How can they be involved in that process? Because often that's when it's handed over to the experts that can do the statistics, do the data viz. Here's a project called Data Therapy by my colleagues Emily Bargov and Rahul Bargov, who work with communities to understand the data embedded there, find the story in it, and then visualize it in a way like murals that they can all participate participate in and don't require those coding skills. But there's also tools that can take those aerial photography, stitch them together automatically for people who don't know how to program it themselves, like MapKnitter from Public Lab or the Open Drone Map. Number 4, infrastructures around this stuff. You can think about it in terms of the open data movement. How do we collect this data together that these drone civil society actors are using, create best practices around it, such that this can be shared with a wider community? And so groups like OpenStreetMap that have been doing this for years with mapping projects, creating layers that are open and accessible for others to use. Similarly, Conservation Drones is an organization that's pretty new for folks using it for conservation purposes, trying to do that same work. Now, can drones be made civic? There's still barriers. There's still the fear around the military aspect. There's privacy issues for the folks that aren't invited to participate in these participatory design sessions. And there's licensing issues where, you know, the regulations aren't even in such that we could have people pilot some of these things. But I think it's still important to think of participatory design practices making drones civic. And it's always important to think of making civil society applications ethical and representative. That's always worth it. So thank you very much.
And that is my title, so that's awesome. Look at this guy. We can see in the background, this is 1930s, it's Germany. This is a crowd that's enthralled, probably with Hitler or at least the Nazi Party. And here's this guy, standing in the crowd, arms crossed, not going along. When we talk about civic engagement, we need to talk about this kind of civic engagement too. The civic engagement that says, I will stand out, I will be different. I will not always go along with the crowd. And we at Facing History and ourselves, we're like every organization out here today. We have a lot of digital resources. Teachers can go on our site. They can log in, download resources, whole books, movies, sign up for workshops, all sorts of stuff. But we know that that's not enough for civic engagement. We've been in this business for a while, so we know it takes building empathy. It takes relationships. It takes students learning that they can stop and pause, that they need to stop and pause to think about their own choices. And they need to be critical thinkers as they're doing that as well. That's what helps civic engagement happen. Facing History has been around for about 40 years. We've reached almost 4 million students. We're in 150 countries. And you know what? It's not enough, right? There's 7 billion people on this world, and they aren't just physically in these spaces, they're digitally in these spaces. So we need to collectively think about how do we expand that. We know that part of what works is thinking about case studies, looking at the Holocaust, looking at the Armenian genocide, looking at contemporary issues of bullying, films. LA Film Festival is starting today too, or this week, right? How do we think about those films to make us do action? We know it works because of people like Rosemary. Rosemary goes to a local school. She came to a Facing History, or she had a Facing History teacher, and after that she started pulling her peers with her to the advisory office and the teacher's office if they needed help. She was one of a number that we celebrated a few weeks ago as upstanders in the world. These are amazing people making a difference in LA. So in addition to Rosemary, we have a Vanessa Avali. She is cleaning up MacArthur Park. Those of you in LA know what MacArthur Park is. Vanessa is out there telling people about the services the government is doing, calling the LA government when a light bulb is out. She's doing amazing things. Cynthia Perez at another school, she's already fighting racism. She's already mobilizing against police brutality. These people make a difference. We know it works. We know that they're amazing. These are 3 stories. How do we tell the stories of 4 million students? How do we tell the stories? How do we mobilize to get people 400 million stories out there doing these things? Right now, they're making a difference on their school campuses. They're changing school culture in really profound ways. How do we do that with the world? Right? I'm here at this conference because I'm learning from all of you too, and we need to collectively be doing this. Right? Facing History for a while has been working with and looking to learn from people. So people like Joe Kahn and Henry Jenkins, Ethan Zuckerman, from many of the people that are here today or working with other people like this today. We look to the HP Alliance to see what we can learn from you, from the Dreamers. We need to be thinking about this together of how do we take civic engagement and the things we know are important for civic engagement and bring it into our world today that is both physical and digital. We look for companies that are doing innovative things too, right? So Zaption allows us to slow down our thinking, allows us to engage in different ways. What other tools are out there that we can use? What other structures can we use so that we learn from our students as much as they're learning from us? Right? How do we do this in the way that in a world that is constantly moving? So we have blogs and social media, but that's only part of the story, right? We're here at this conference. This is only part of the story. How do we keep this conversation going? And I'll give you a couple things that you can do right away if you want to keep this conversation going with us. Because in addition to these social medias, you can subscribe to our blog. You can be part of Educator Innovator Community. We love them. We're part of one of their partners too. Connect Learning TV is going to feature Facing History in August. So we love that as well. We need to collectively see ways that we can have civic engagement that spans a world that is both physical and digital. Thank you. Woo! Woo!
Hi. Can you guys hear me? Can everyone hear me? No? Okay, hang on. Can you hear me now? No. Handheld mic. Now? Okay, so I'm Allie, and I'm the founder of a social media impact campaign called Start From Here, and I'm going to talk about how media can positively affect the fate of America's homeless youth, but thought I'd share some facts. So 2.5 million American youth every year experience homelessness. 40% identifies LGBT, which means that 40% are coming out to their community and facing discrimination and rejection. 50% are fleeing from some sort of physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. 17% are engaging in survival sex, which is defined as trading sex for a bed to sleep in, a hot meal, drugs, or money. Latino and African American youth are adversely affected. And only 20% are being counted because counts often include only those who are physically sleeping on the street on any given night. But the majority of homeless youth are sleeping in cars, on couches, on the floors of friends. And they're not being counted, and they're being cut off from public services. The good news is that in 2010, President Obama set a goal to end youth homelessness by 2020, and this unleashed an array of federal and local level initiatives, and we do have the political will like never before to end youth homelessness. Count them. Pending federal legislation will make access to government services more readily available to more youth because we're changing the policy on how these young people are being counted. Housing First initiatives, which posit that to end youth homelessness, you provide them access to safe, secure, affordable housing, have all but eradicated homelessness in New Orleans, Phoenix, and Salt Lake City. Once housed, youth need support reintegrating into academic, vocational, and job opportunities, and many require therapeutic support, so nonprofits need funding to provide these services. But what can media do? Media plays a critical role in ending youth homelessness, which is a goal that's in our sights. Our dominant visualization of youth homelessness is a guy who looks like he hasn't showered in 3 weeks, propping up a sign with a bulldog next to him, but he is not the majority. In fact, these guys are. This is Blair, Daniela, and Jesse, and they all spent their youth homeless. Jesse found his dad dead of a drug overdose when he was 6, and his mom couldn't keep things together. So he spent his childhood homeless in Venice, sleeping in cars and construction sites and in dilapidated buildings. This is Blair. She had the perfect two-parent childhood. Her dad died suddenly her freshman year, leaving her mom with debt and an eviction notice. At the same time, her career as a beauty pageant was ascendant, and she was literally the reigning Miss Colorado when she was homeless. This is Daniela. She transitioned suddenly at the age of 15 from male to female, and her family kicked her out. And she knew that if she could just keep herself in school in Westchester County and get a diploma, she'd have a chance at a future. So she survived by living in the subway. So back to what media can do. Media can educate, can raise awareness, and it can build empathy. It can build and demonstrate public support, which in turn influences politicians who might not necessarily be thinking first about vulnerable youth. Policy change at the federal level is in process, but the greatest change can come at the municipal level via mayors. Housing First programs are often their initiatives. Media attention has been shown to positively affect their priorities and their areas of focus. Finally, it's important for media to tell the story of exemplary nonprofit organizations who are working at the front lines, like these ones. And there also are participatory organizations in Start From Here. So if you want to learn more about Start From Here, you can. My website, my email and the website are here. And I thank you so much for your time.
Oh, hello. Hi. My name is Deb Louie, and I'm a doctoral, sorry, I don't know if you can hear me, a doctoral student, a doctoral candidate at the University of Pennsylvania. And this is my scintillating title, Situating Educational Making, Examining the Diverse Context of Library Makerspaces. And I'm talking about what else? Library makerspaces. So one of the first things that people always ask me when I tell them my research is like they wonder what the maker movement is. And I'm sure you guys actually know what that is, but my short, quick hand answer is always like 3D printers and like people who use them. Got it? But all kidding aside, beyond just being about these sort of hallmark objects, I really want to describe it as a trend that emphasizes hands-on material production of personalized projects using like both high and low-tech materials. And as you all know, I'm sure the education community has really embraced it as well, saying that it's maybe the best and brightest new way of engaging students in STEM and STEAM topics, and sort of extending our long-term interest in constructionist, active, and experiential learning. So libraries have also sort of taken to makerspaces because they are supposed to be institutions of public learning, and lots of libraries have invested time and money building maker programs, maker spaces, and there are some people who question whether or not this actually fits the goal of the library, but there are others who really describe the ways in which it continues the long-standing, the long-standing interest of libraries in providing public access to educational resources. You know, they can be books, they can be computers, but now they're also, you know, technologies that people need to use to sort of further themselves in today's economy. So my sort of intervention is about studying, because I'm actually an educational researcher, and most of the educational research on making has sort of focused on, you know, evaluation and assessment, like is it effective, what are people actually learning, how can we measure this? And that sort of necessarily involves isolating these moments and taking them out of where they are so you can sort of transfer them elsewhere. But I think this kind of, even though it's really good work, I think it's really important to consider the larger, diverse context in which making actually occurs, because that influences what it is, what it can do, and what it means. You know, so this is not only the physical neighborhoods, but also the socio-cultural like environments that have inspired them. So in order to sort of give you a glimpse of like the kind of work that I'm doing, I'm actually considering two types of libraries. I've been in these libraries for the past couple of months. There's a suburban library, a Middletown Free Library, and then also an urban maker program called Maker John, of which there are many people in the audience involved, that it's in several libraries, branches across the city. So just to give you a glimpse of like what you can do to think about the context, I want to ask here, how do the spatial attributes of the library as a context-based factor influence, you know, the types of activities that are offered, as well as like the mission and the goal of the program? So starting off with the suburban library, this is actually a picture of the intersection that's like really close to it. The librarian at at Middletown actually said that you kind of take your life in your hands when you try to cross it by foot. And the general sort of emphasis about it is that there's no sidewalks leading to it. You can't walk to it. It's not really easy to get to unless you get in your car, you park it, and you do something there. And when I asked him how he thought this influenced the maker programs there, he said that, you know, people come here for very intentional activities, whether it's taking out a library book or participating in a workshop. And that kind of makes this space, like these maker programs, more transactional. It's based on discrete units that people can come and actually take away. You know, whether or not they're signing for workshops, participating in demos and trainings. But this is very different, on the other hand, than the urban program that I've been looking at, Maker John. This is one of the branches in Kensington, which you can reach by walking. You know, it's located very close to public transportation, to where kids go to school, and sort of where they live. And it's described generally as a safe place for them to be in between sort of school and when their parents pick them up. And kids just hang out there for hours a day. And so how does this influence, you know, what kind of maker programs they have? less transactional, I would say, and more communal. So instead of having, programs that you can sign up for, you actually have these things like drop-in after-school programs that last for like hours, and then kids are often just sitting around. Sometimes this leads to unproductive days, and people feel kind of as if nothing's really happening. But other times you can see how, being there for a long amount of time can lead to these slow bit-by-bit creating of like much larger maker projects, such as this like really awesome green screen monster movie that they showed last Halloween. So the thing that I want to sort of push forth, is that making can do different things in different places. That might seem kind of obvious, but I think a lot of the best practices models that we've seen as of late, as great as they are, I think that we have to sort of like move beyond that and consider maybe how the actual context of where these makerspaces are influence what happened. So I urge us to ask these questions. Like, first of all, how do people already use these spaces? What are their needs? And how can the programs that we exist actually answer these needs instead of bring in like external sort of goals? So thanks.
Hi, I'm Gabe Lyon from Chicago Architecture Foundation. Shout out to my team. This is a little history tour into the past and also into the future. I have a crazy idea. I actually think the entire concept of connected learning has its origins in the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. I know you're skeptical, but listen, just go with me on this. Fire just wrecked the city of Chicago. This is the fire where the cow kicked the, right? Okay. So wrecked the city, but then after the city was like burned to the ground, 300 people died. It was also sad. Great growth happened. There was a population immigration surge. By the turn of the century, Chicago was actually mostly immigrants and first generation born people. There was poverty, there was traffic, there was garbage, there was pollution. And by the 1900s, the business people were like freaking the F out. They were like, this is chaos. We're never going to be a great city if we don't get it together and get a plan. So Daniel Burnham and Edward Bennett made a plan, and then 2 years later they made a plan for students called the Wacker Manual. And they had one mission, that students have to be active stewards of their city. So they made the plan of Chicago, but the heart of it was really, what could students do? And this woman, Ella Flagg Young, who was a disciple of John Dewey, great progressive educator, she was like, this is awesome. It's mandatory. Every single kid who is an 8th grader in Chicago is going to read the Wacker Manual. In fact, Mayor Jay Daley actually read the Wacker Manual when he was a kid. And let's just check in with the progressives, because we mostly are them. Progressives think that the purpose of education is not actually acquisition of skills. That the purpose of education is fulfill your potential and then do good for the betterment of others. So, you can read this really, really fast. You have fast eyes. I'm talking really fast also. But here's the gist of it. Everybody's a planner. And the real question for us in this moment, in this connected learning space is like, all right, well, how do we plan? Here's some plans. These are all plans for the city of Chicago right now. None of them have a component for youth. None. Zero. And the question is, what is the question for planning? This is the question. How do we deal with these disparities? The shiny center and the periphery, as my hero, Craig Watkins, has posed. This is a question that's a social question. It's not a technical training question. And when we really start to think, like, what if this was a city? All right, so now we're in the future. What if this were a city? Is this a good city? How would we know? How would we decide? And that's where I really feel like, is it enough to be connected, or do we need to be connected with a purpose so that we can make a judgment about this? The reality is, kids are already urban planners. They don't need training. Back in January, I and my colleague Jesse launched this new program, teen program, and we said to the teens on their first day, all right, you're here, find a partner, go build something. And they built these structures. And we said to them, all right, so what's the difference between what you just built and a city? In 30 minutes, we had a beautiful city. There were no prisons. Everybody had a way to live, make money, have transit. There was culture, there was libraries. These kids did not need training to be beautiful city planners. So, that's really the question for us. We're connected, we can build a structure, but to what end? And so that's where I think the Wacker Manual comes in. So this is back to 1911, we're going back in time again. Wacker Manual has two big ideas. One, it's being connected with a purpose, and two, it's not just some kids, it's all kids, all of them, every single one of them. So, all right, I like to play this game, maybe you play it too, where you imagine there's actually a disaster happening right now, but you can't see it. And what's happening is like pensions are going away and infrastructure is crumbling and like your parks aren't as good as you want them to be. So let's just say this was the crisis happening and you couldn't see it and you needed to make a new Whacker manual. Well, what would it look like in 2015? Maybe it would be a graphic novel with young people as the protagonists. We're actually playing with this idea at CAF right now. But let's follow that through. What if there actually was a graphic novel that was mandatory for all Chicagoans to read, where they were the protagonists and they were the stewards of their own city? So, you know, look, I know that a graphic novel is like not gonna solve the problems of Chicago. I get that, you get that too. But I do think there is something about the nugget in the Whacker manual that we need to take to heart. We do need to take our work a little bit more seriously. We do need to believe that it's not just some kids, it's all kids, because we as adults can actually equip young people not just to be stewards of their own future, but actually of everyone's cities. So, thank you. This is my alum friend.
Hi, and thanks for your time this afternoon. As you know, if you've been at the conference, cool digital stuff is being made around the world all the time by children and youth in and out of school. But some kids and youth, those with special needs, are left out of this making. I'm here as a general ed literacy researcher to talk about I think that's my next slide. No, keep talking. I'm here as a general ed literacy researcher to talk about a gap, it's not, a divide, a disciplinary disinclination. Nope, these are the end of my slides. Should I just keep talking? This is my last, just keep talking? Okay, I gotta go back, sorry. Special ed researchers are disinclined to see children and youth with disabilities as makers or designers of potentially powerful digital media. They're all out of order. And digital media and learning scholars and practitioners like yourselves are also disinclined to talk about or work with children and youth with special needs. This is a problem of equity and access. Worse, it's a social justice problem. Hi, slide number 2. We'll get there. So it's gonna be like a puzzle for you. You can figure out what goes with what I say. So in the fall of 2012, there were about 67 million students ages 6 to 21 in the US. Of those 67 million, 8.5%, or 5.5 million students, receive special ed services. What do I mean by the label special ed? 40% have a specific learning disability, 18% have a speech or language impairment, 8% have autism, 6.3% are emotionally disturbed, 2% have developmental delays. Oh look, there's my statistics. There is, of course, technology in the special ed world. The most recognized kind is assistive technology, technological devices that allow learners to communicate. For example, Stephen Hawking has a thumb switch and a blink switch on his glasses that allowed him to go online, send email, and speak through a voice synthesizer. Sorry, someday you'll see a picture of Stephen Hawking soon. And the other kind of technology in special ed is instructional software that helps kids learn skills, like technology-based graphic organizers. But using technology, oh, there he is. Using technology to make things with kids, making powerful products with kids with special needs, not so much. Meanwhile, in the DML world, there are all sorts of interesting projects going on. We don't yet necessarily know the effects on youth of becoming content producers, but we do know, oh, there's the graphic organizer. We do know that many kids are making cool stuff around the world. Indeed, one of the goals underlying a lot of DML work is to increase equity, access, and social justice. In projects like one that there's a slide for somewhere, children and youth are crafting identities in digital products, using them to connect with digital audiences. But as I said, these are parallel worlds. There's very little work in the DML field with children and youth with disabilities, and there's very little work in special education that positions children as makers of digital artifacts of any kind. So what are the consequences of these disciplinary disinclinations? Well, 80% of students with disabilities spend 40% of their time in regular classrooms, so some kids with special needs could be included in-school digital media production. If it's done in school, that is, still not, no. Just don't look at the slides. As you know, most of the vast majority of work in school is still non-digital. Then there are the 20% of those students with disabilities who get no general ed exposure and who have no productive technologies in their classrooms. Out of school, there's very little research about special needs kids using technology out of school. Meryl Alper's recent book is one of the very few examples. But this isn't meant to be a dire, depressing Ignite talk, and here's why. I'm going to offer my own work as an example of how to bring these two fields together. I've been making videos on iPads with kids at a public school for 4 years. My team and I have helped 200 kids ages 8 to 10 design about 350 movies. The statistics are proportional, so about 18 of those 200 kids had disabilities of some sort or another. I didn't know the statistics or the labels at first, but as I began to work with the kids and analyze my data, I saw the special needs kids, and I began to talk to my special ed colleagues about them. There was Cindy, an 8-year-old Latina with autism. So Cindy, there's a picture of her in here somewhere, and she took ballet class, and so she danced in part of her autobiography. You might think making a video with an autistic kid would be difficult, and it was, but actually the autistic child's urge to make things perfect was a strength for her in this process. There was Alex, who had dyslexia, who did all of the writing tasks. We asked him, scripting, storyboarding, while hating it. And then he did it to get to the iPad and get that in his hands. And the moment he had it, he went and made his movies without actually referencing his writing. Oh, there's Cindy. There she is. And then there was Javier, who had several learning disabilities, including dyslexia, dysgraphia, and issues with fine motor coordination. There's Alex's writing. Writing in particular was very hard for Javier. He loved to draw, though, so he drew many of the images for his movies, including one of his family that passed by some time ago. 3 of Javier's movies were solo projects, and 2 were with groups. His high level, oh, there's the ending slide. Am I timing off too, Claudia? Do I have a minute? Keep going, okay. 3 of his movies were solo projects, 2 were with groups. His level of participation was possible mostly because we didn't know that he couldn't make movies, so we didn't try to stop him. As I've worked to analyze data, okay, Stephen, come on up. Here you go.
That title has nothing to do with what I'm going to say. Okay, great. Take a deep breath. Just like when the chokehold of Officer Pantaleo tightly grasped around the neck of Eric Garner, cut off his oxygen and suffocated him, this country is suffocating from the asphyxiation of resources, support, and sadly value of the least of us, the people that need help the most, the ones whose ancestors built this country. This country is suffocating because it's already given up on its youth. The thing is, we were dealt a bad hand, and everybody in this room knows it. I just want to say, I am so happy that it's sexy to talk about equity now. Somebody in this room gets it, right? Yeah. I too believe that the answers lie in self-determination. That it'll take the most oppressed in our communities participating to solve all the problems. A revolution at this point is absolutely inevitable. And each day I'm more convinced that I'll see radical change in my lifetime. Young people need to learn to mold this society into something better. Dream Defenders is an uprising from communities in conflict, shifting culture through transformational organizing. We started in 2012 in response to the savage murder of Trayvon Martin by the state of Florida, with a 40-mile march to ensure that George Zimmerman was held accountable. We got Zimmerman arrested with our collective power, and when George Zimmerman was acquitted in 2013, we took over the Florida State Capitol for 31 days and 30 nights to push for fundamental change in Florida's laws. So what is learning? Here's the definition. Learning is the act, process, or experience of gaining knowledge or skill. That sounds right. When we were in the Capitol, we learned more about being civically engaged than any civics class even tried to teach us. We were lobbying, we had our membership crafting legislation, and we were organizing. Since then, with our squads all around Florida, we've been mapping out the power in our communities. We've been organizing, we've been taking direct action on targets that plague our communities, our families, every day. And we're not the only ones. Groups like Black Youth Project 100, Ohio Students Association, Hands Up United in Ferguson, everyone involved in Black Lives Matter, and so many more are engaged, launching and winning campaigns, and learning how to create the radical change that we need. We've found that the most important thing for us to be doing right now is build a movement. And while there's plenty of information out there to guide us, nothing is better than pure experience to find out what works and what doesn't work. This is a transformational experience. As we transform ourselves, we will also transform this country. What side of this transformation will you be on? I just checked today to make sure the correct number is 503 people that police have killed this year alone. It's not July yet. I don't have to check to know that there are 2.2 million people that are locked up today, and 59% of them are Black or Latino, despite them being minorities. Dejaria Becton is a 15-year-old Black girl that just a couple of days ago was violently arrested by a 40-year-old white police officer. He put his full body weight on her, slammed her to the ground, put his knee in her back, and pulled on her braids, not before pulling his gun on the other black kids that were there and the diverse group of kids that were there at the pool. Brittany Overstreet is a 10th grader in Tampa, Florida, who had her jaw broken in 2 places by a school resource officer who thought that she had mace in her bag. She didn't have mace in her bag. To make matters worse, she's facing a resisting arrest charge right now. This is what it sounds like when the system screams that your life doesn't matter. This is the trap. We're seeing it from all angles. The trap is a revolving door of dehumanization that happens to people of color in this country. There are 3 main perpetrators that work together. Are you ready to hear them? Yes. Schools, police, and prisons. And it's going to take a lot of innovation for us to disarm the trap and to create something better. School didn't prepare me to have to fix this country in order for it to be inhabitable, in order for it to be a place that I feel comfortable having children one day. The most important thing, the most important type of learning that people can receive today is by participating in the movement. So I have some questions. How is this digital learning technology going to provide groups like Dream Defenders with tools that they need to develop more robust political education, skills training, and leadership development for our membership? What does digital learning look like in prisons to provide a quality education for people whose dignity has been stripped away from them by the state? When kids like Brittany Overstreet are pushed into alternative schools, or worse, how are you going to provide the best quality education and technology for them to learn? They need it the most. I have more questions. You can holler at me.
Thank you. So a couple of questions for the audience. My name is Andrew Richey. I'm from Personal Democracy Media and Civic Hall. How many of you believe that the world would be a better place if all 7 billion people were connected to an open internet? Open and accessible and as low a cost as possible. Next question. How many of you believe that even though Congress just ruled that the NSA can no longer do mass surveillance, that the NSA will actually stop doing mass surveillance? Not a single person. What does that say about our trust in government? And the other question is how many of you have read the terms of service all the way through before you clicked agree on that app you were downloading? 2, 3 people. I believe you can separate the world into 2 distinct parts, BI and AI, before internet and after internet. 1994 was when the Netscape browser was invented, and that is ground zero. So let me ask you a couple more questions about the BI side. Name an institution, a government, an organization of any kind, founded before 1994 that today wants to see the internet distributed as openly and freely to as many people as possible in the world. You won't be able to find one. There's one outlier. But let's talk about the AI side. Let's take Larry and Sergey at their word. Make all the world's information available to everyone and do no evil. Well, unfortunately, Google can no longer do no evil for 3 reasons. One is they are making money, and it's really hard to do no evil and make no money. Very hard to do. But the second reason that it's really hard for Google to do no evil is that the BI guys are fighting back, and they're organizing themselves to try to control the way in which the internet is going to work. Everybody remember SOPA and PIPA? Okay, well, their TPP is about to pass tomorrow, and there isn't quite the same. And the third reason is because there's a whole bunch of companies that are exploiting the fact that our government doesn't understand the internet, or that the BI guys want to control it and are making money just collecting our data and only for the purposes of greed. It's almost like there's 2 different currencies. There's a currency of money and there's a currency of information, and they're trying, and the government and corporations from before the internet's birth are trying to create a new Federal Reserve for information, and information is a currency. But there is one outlier, and that's the New York Public Library. This is the New York City Public Library, and about a year ago I had the pleasure of meeting the president of the New York Public Library at a dinner, and he announced that 10,000 people a month are accessing the internet using New York City Public Library branches. And afterwards I said to him, why don't you let them take it home? And he said, what do you mean take it home? I said, you lend them books. Why don't you lend them Wi-Fi cards and let the students and the people in the libraries take them home? So his head exploded. We went to the Knight Foundation. We went to Google. We went to Robinhood and OSF, and we got $2 million, and there's now a 10,000 unit pilot
giving out Wi-Fi cards to New York City public school students and after-school programs. And here's a quick idea. Imagine if there was a law passed in the country that would allow coding to be considered a language, not just a separate thing separated from their core learning needs. So we didn't stop there. So Tony and I are now talking about what would it be like if the library was to become an ISP. Imagine going to the library, getting your library card and getting a secure email address, being offered an Android phone. Imagine if the New York City Public Library was able to light up NYCHA housing projects with low-cost Wi-Fi, which is what the mayor of New York is trying to do right now. Imagine if the library was, instead of the back end of the fight for the open internet, was at the front end of the fight for the open internet. That's where libraries belong. The internet needs to be open, and we need to all get together. We have to ask ourselves questions about what happens when we press agree. We have to challenge our government to keep it open. We have to make sure that the data that they collect is collected in a way where we can see what they're doing with it. And by the way, this is not an internet organization. This is a walled garden. This is not what the open internet is about. This is wrong. And we should call it out, and we should educate our elected leaders that this kind of behavior is not good for our society. Our society is only going to be good if we're all connected. And we have to take responsibility for that to happen. And if it doesn't happen, the BI guys are going to come. They're going to take this away. They're going to make it possible for there to be a new kind of Federal Reserve. So instead of having a democracy which was great in the agricultural age and subverted in the industrial age and being destroyed in the information age, let's take responsibility for the currency of information and save our democracy now. Thank you very much.
All right, everybody. My name is Ramesh Srinivasan. I'm a professor at UCLA, and what we have here is the cloud, right? And this is how we're talking about it, thinking about the internet. We think about it as benign, as neutral, as part of our bodies. Clouds are made of water. 70% of our bodies are made of water. However, behind the cloud, just as we just heard, lie various political economies, right? These clouds are not necessarily open. There are various corporations that have terms of service, have various agendas, have various modes of ordering the world that exist, that form, that fund, that fuel the cloud. So if you even think about the very internet, it is a material infrastructure, right? And what's notable in this slide here is you actually see only two major cables connecting the global south, the continents of South America and Africa. And that's very important because many cases we see the expansion of access to various technologies, but actually access tends to reinforce inequality. The rich get richer. So my interests are very much in the question of ontology. How do we rethink databases? How do we rethink networks? How do we rethink the very design of technologies to support peoples and communities on the margin? And so this is an example of a project I did back in the past with various Native American communities that had internet access, but the idea was how can we take that access and actually create a space, a public space that functions for these communities rather than simply an infrastructure. And part of that involves working with people's knowledges, people's ontologies, people's ways of speaking about and understanding the world. So this is very much like a totemic diagram, almost like Claude Lévi-Strauss, ideas, concepts that are part of people's worlds. I've done work in the past 10 to 12 years with the Zuni community in New Mexico, and this might seem simply like a pelt that's being examined by Zuni elders in a museum, but it's actually an indigenous map. And what's profound when you work with such communities and you think about digital museums and digital libraries and spaces is they speak about the world in fundamentally different ways. Fundamentally differently than the ways in which the West organizes such knowledge. They speak about these things through stories, the things people do, things related to people, places, entities, and times. And so we built a simple system with the Zuni, with National Science Foundation funding, to try to support Zuni knowledge in particular authentic ways. And this was profound because this was an anahoho, a kachina. And what's incredible here is what you see is the ways people make knowledge at Zuni is embodied, it's collective, it's profound. It's many people looking at one computer at the same time, which is something we never think for granted because people actually produce knowledge collectively as a community. Because otherwise what our world has is an ordering of knowledge that's sequestered to the corporations that rule the world. And look at this, how Zuni pottery is described by Google as a commodity for sale on eBay. So my work in the last several years has looked at media activism around the world. This is an image of Tahrir Square, where I've been working the past 3 years. Now I'm on a list and I can't go back. I also moonlight as a reporter for Al Jazeera and write op-eds for them. And this was a powerful, powerful moment all over this country, particularly because of this hype that was associated with this revolution. This is a t-shirt I bought in Tahrir Square. It doesn't fit me, it's on my friend's infant child. How could this be the case if at the time of the revolts, under 5% of people in the entire city of Cairo, let alone the whole country, had access to social media technology? Because what we tend to do is talk about walled gardens, echo chambers, these ideas that technology somehow magically produce democracy. It's not about that. It's about people's voices. It's about rethinking the codes of technology, the networks of technology to support people's practices. This is an example of it, very much a shack in Islamic Cairo, only one electricity connection showing Al Jazeera Arabic, and the Al Jazeera Arabic reporter that I spoke to the previous day tells me he gets stories on Twitter. So activists are realizing and organizing mechanisms to subvert the agendas of technology to reach much larger publics. And this is an example of that. A number of activists meeting in person, but much like us today, actually in the back of the room have a screen where they're engaging with people across the world and bringing people's voices who don't have access to technology to the street here. This is Khalid Abdallah, kite runner actor, major activist, the leader of the Mosireen Collective, realizing we got to take our stuff offline, off these walled gardens, take it to the street, take it to spaces all over the country. This was signed by 30 million people in June of 2013. I was in the middle of these revolts, and this was actually started as an online petition. People rapidly realized we needed to reach people by reproducing it offline as a form of petition that people could sign. And I was here at this very distressing moment where we were organizing and revolting again in Egypt, and my friends were very inspired by this moment, but there's one major difference. There's a helicopter on top. And this is the thing, the myth of digital utopianism, that we somehow escape and generate democracy in such a way, but actually in many ways, the institutions of power can overtake such social movements. So this is very important to remember in the context of all our social movements, all our activism, all our struggles for social justice. Thank you.
Every afternoon during the school year, my 12-year-old son sits at the kitchen table and he does his schoolwork. Every other afternoon, he stops abruptly, he breaks a pencil, rips some paper, flings it to the ground, and he shouts, "Why do I have to go to school? Ah! Everything I can learn on YouTube." I have 4 minutes and 30 seconds to explore with you what on the surface could seem like a parenting problem. During Kai, it's my 12-year-old son's free time in the summer, after school, when he's done with his homework, he reads, he writes, he watches videos, he screencasts, he records videos, he draws diagrams, he will Skype with his friends and he'll make video recordings. He'll shout to his friend that he needs to turn his amp down while having a FaceTime jam session, and he'll occasionally yell to me that in playing games online, there's no pause button. At DML this year, we're called upon to promote equity in digital learning and engage in thinking of ways to address educational opportunity gaps in today's technological world. This is a place, right, to address what is a parenting issue and a learning issue. This is an educational opportunity gap. The inquiry learning happening outside of formal education, the quandary of bringing opportunities to formal education that mass communication allows for, this quandary is the foundation of digital media and learning, creating spaces. How do we bring the inquiry learning that young people are engaged with in making videos and creating online and learning in their own communities of interest during free time and after school to everyday learning practices? If the conversation needs to be shifted from access to tech to access to opportunities to create and engage using tech, Henry Jenkins et al., and if the single most important characteristic of the internet is the limitless capacity for worldwide community and the limitless exchange of ideas, And if the internet brings about a new way of learning that's not new or revolutionary, but is the norm for graduating high school seniors and college classes, if Davidson and Goldberg's call to examine potential new models of digital learning and to rethink our virtually enabled and enhanced learning institutions is still a compelling one, and if traditional learning institutes have the potential to become as flexible and robust as the best social networking sites, then in taking the conversation to the basis of digital media and learning, in convening as we do here, or in Boston in 2014, or in Chicago in 2013, or in San Francisco in 2012, the question is, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, what's the value of video? What is the way that we are going to bridge the gap for my 12-year-old, Kai, and for all students? For all students. This is a parenting issue, and it's a fundamental access issue. I have 2 minutes, 3? Like 2.5 minutes left to tango with you here at the Digital Media and Learning Conference. It'll be a short dance. So, from the golden age of the VCR cart on a rainy day or with a substitute teacher to the current era of flipped classrooms and personalized learning, the value of video is undeniable. Video is also the language of youth culture. So what are the ways that a video inspires and ignites student-centered learning in the digital age? How can we support the efforts of video integration to be systematically leveraged to maximize its worth? How video inspires. Let's acknowledge the ground upon which we convene. Video can be a catalyst to understanding, making, sharing, doing. The 12-year-old doesn't care much about what his teachers think. He cares a whole lot about what his peers think. He makes videos explaining various cheats and games. He watches videos to learn how to do other cheats. He changes how he plays in response to the things that he's learned. So what can video do to inspire young people? Video inspires action, reaction, recreation. The 12-year-old boy makes, he learns, he does. Take that learning loop and bring it to the foundation of formal education. Allow students the spaces to create and make and remake and use video as the catalyst, the spark, the inspiration. How to create more opportunities that use video as a conduit, shameless plug. KQED Public Media in Northern California provides powerful tools for using and making video in the classroom. Programs like these are support for creating and making, and you can learn more about them at our session in the cafe on Saturday. Thank you.
Okay, we're almost there. So May 25th, 2013, I get a call from my student J to tell me that my student D had been killed. It is a call that no teacher prepares themselves to get, but they do get them, and I am here because I passionately, undeniably care about re-enfranchising and rehumanizing the experience of those we charge with taking care of our young ones, teachers. So the question is, what happens to teachers when their students are killed? This is 2012 in Oakland. These are all the young people, 10 to 24, who were killed. That is out of 131 homicides, 33, 25%. So when you look at the faces, the question is, what was the experience of teachers when their young people were killed? So we want to really make sure that we take care of teachers, and it turns out that media and communication and information sharing is a critical piece in teachers building resilience and teachers having bounce back and making meaning when their student is killed. So the idea is cognitive appraisal. It's a psychological term for when something happens to us, how we make meaning, how we decide if it's something that's safe for us or something that's dangerous for us. And so my question to probe for teachers is, when a student dies, is it a threat? How do we make it so that it's something that we can live with and live through and not get challenged with and lose our teachers who are really there to care for our young ones? That was there was a picture of where my young person was killed. So my mission is that if we want students to arrive to school ready to learn, then we also have to prepare teachers to arrive to school ready to teach and leaders to arrive to school ready to lead so they can do all the things that you've been talking about all day today and tomorrow.
This is called secondary trauma. My mission is also to make sure that we, again, talk about the concentric circles of care. We do a really great job now. We're at an inflection point of really paying attention to students living with trauma and students who are experiencing gang and gun violence. We don't do a really good job talking about teachers. We do not do a really good job talking about leaders. And so my question for all of you is, how do we actually get that conversation back into the forefront? So here's the deal. I studied 141 teachers in LA, and I asked them, for those who had experienced a student violent death, what they needed when their student was killed. They wanted to connect with their colleagues. They did not want someone coming in and doing crisis control. They wanted to talk about it with themselves. They wanted to go to the funeral, and they wanted information about when the funeral and memorial was. And they also wanted visible representation of their students that they cared about on school premise. This is an old school, this is not high-tech media, but this is a way to really honor that that young person existed. Oftentimes, those young people who are killed due to gang and gun violence are not students that we actually have at the front of our classroom. So we know that information sharing is critical. Teachers often find out about their students being killed through Facebook and through their students, if they even find out. So I had 3 teachers report in my study that they found out about their students being killed over intercom as they were teaching. And so the question is, how do we also create systems of information sharing that are compassionate, empathetic, trauma-informed, and allow teachers to hold space not only for their young people, but also for themselves? And that requires restructuring schools that will understand that community violence is a reality that we have to acknowledge, and then we also have to shift the way that we provide leadership to make schools a safe space to learn and to teach. And so the other piece that I want to just to concentrate on is that oftentimes death can make us feel like we are at a loss of something, but actually the teachers reported that when a student died, going to the memorial, being in social community with teachers who had experienced that young person, actually reinvigorated the reason that they were going to teach. It rehumanized their dedication. It wasn't Common Core. It was actually this idea that the young person had a life beyond what they saw in that classroom space. And so my call to all of us is that schools have an enormous, enormous capacity to either exacerbate trauma or to mitigate it. Part of the policies, information and media often is manifested in school policy. And so the policy in schools doesn't allow for teachers to go to that memorial because a student death isn't a family or isn't a work colleague. And so we then hold our teachers back from doing those events that actually can help them build resilience. So my call also to us, the last call of this day, is to not only pay attention to all the bright and dazzling things that all of you are talking about, but to also spend time really paying attention, paying heart and paying mind to some of the trickier questions so that we can really prepare everyone to come to school ready to learn, feel safe, feel held, and feel human. Thank you.
You got 5 minutes.
Can we please have a huge breath? Just take a breath. And now, let's give these incredible visionaries, incredible leaders, incredible thinkers a huge round of applause. As I was listening to each person up here tonight, each one of them so incredible, some bringing such obscure moments of history or places of you would never think about regarding drones, or connecting it to the need for an open internet, or reinvigorating an authentic civil rights movement, a way to deal with loss, all of these things. I started thinking about how anyone who's seen Star Wars knows that empires can be problematic. And don't worry, I'm closing up this. We're gonna go drink in a minute. But I just want to say just one thing. There's to paraphrase Joseph Campbell, if you want to understand what empire you're living in, look to the tallest building in the city. And the tallest building in the city in the 1400s in Europe was the church By the 1700s, it was the political palace, the nation state. By the 20th century, it's the multinational corporation. And yet, in the 21st century, we made mention of the cloud. Now, the cloud is not the internet, but if we were to take it as the internet, as a metaphor, if you ask any child where a cloud is, they will point to the sky. And the sky is taller than the tallest building. We, netizens and citizens, are interconnected through the internet and are working to keep it safe, open, and accessible for all. But that's not all it is. It's a mirror of reality. I'm willing to bet that there are more young people born since 1990 who listen to Mufasa more than their ministers. Thanks, I got one laugh. That there is a circle of life. We are all interconnected. The internet provides us with one mirror to look at that, but all human connections do. So tonight, listening to these speakers, these are people who are mavens of bringing together our interconnectivity, the only reality that all of us are, to manifest at a time that is a climax in the story of humanity. Let's make this a good story by engaging with them tonight in the cocktail hour, having fun, laughing, crying, doing whatever, just having a great time. Everybody give yourselves a round of applause. And tomorrow we're going to ignite it all again and have an awesome night. And thank our speakers once again, our Ignite Talk speakers. Round of applause.